Hi, and welcome to Mrs. Long's video lesson on the Picture of Dorian Gray, chapter 5. So this chapter is the first time we meet Sybil Vane. Remember, Dorian was talking to Henry about him in the previous chapter. The setting is Sybil Vane's house, and it's a discussion or series of discussions that takes place between Sybil and her mother and her brother. And her brother is about to leave for Australia. He's a sailor, and he's quite concerned about his sister's obsession with this new young man. Okay, so the beginning of the chapter, Sybil is describing to her mother how happy she is. I'm so happy, and you must be happy too. Miss Vane winced. Happy, she echoed. I'm only happy, Sybil, when I see you act. You must not think of anything but your acting. Mr. Isaacs has been very good to us, and we owe him money. So Sybil's mother at first is much more concerned with their financial situation. They are poor. There's no father on the scene, which we learn about later in this chapter. They are indebted to the theatre manager, and her mother understandably is concerned that if her daughter gets distracted, this may affect their living situation. Sybil is young, she's naive, she's completely enamored with this Prince Charming, and she says love is more than money. And of course, her poor mother is just concerned that her daughter is not going to be able to help pay off their debts. Sybil Vane tosses her head and laughs. We don't want him any more, mother. This is the theatre manager. Prince Charming rules life for us now. I love him, she said simply. And her lips are described as petals. And so her mother tries to speak to her. Thin-lipped wisdom spoke from her worn chair, hinted at prudence. But Sybil did not listen. She was free in her prison of passion. Lovely paradox there. So she's caught up in her passion, but this has given her freedom. Her Prince Charming, was with her. And then the mother, I suppose, starts to come around more. Mrs. Vane realizes that, okay, if this young man might be rich, if so, marriage should be thought of. So at least if Sybil is going to be in love, completely in love with this man, perhaps there is some good that could come out of it for both of them. Now, Sybil says to her mother, why does he love me so much? I know why I love him. I love him because he is like what love himself should be. What does he see in me? I'm not worthy of him. Yet, though, I feel so much beneath him. I don't feel humble. I feel terribly proud. So she's got all these mixed emotions. She herself can see that Prince Charming, Dorian, is far above her in stature. But she's much like Dorian was before he had the scales fall from his eyes, courtesy of Lord Henry, doesn't see what other people see in terms of her beauty and her talent. And then she says, Mother, did you love my father as I love Prince Charming? Now this pains the mother because the father is clearly not on the scene. And when James Vane pressures his mother for more information later on, we find out exactly what happened. She says, don't look so sad. I'm happy today as you were 20 years ago. Let me be happy forever. Now, obviously, if Sybil thought about it clearly, she would think, okay, 20 years ago my mother felt as I do now, but look where she is at the moment. But she doesn't have that kind of foresight. The mother says, you're far too young to think of falling in love. What do you know of this young man? You don't even know his name. And so we get to see that on Sybil's part, the love connection is as superficial and based on as little as Dorian's is based on the other side. And so the real words of caution and the reality of the situation is brought forth by James Vane, Sybil's brother, who is off to serve as a sailor in the Navy. He's going to Australia. And he says to his mother, watch over Sybil, don't let her come to any harm. You must watch over her. He almost has this kind of premonition of ill over the situation with Dorian. Perhaps he's more realistic than his mother and his sister, taking the position of the man of the house, but he's worried now that he's not going to be around to be the voice of reason to protect his sister. And so he's trying to transfer that sense of concern onto his mother. So he says, you don't know his name? No, answered the mother with a placid expression. I think it's quite romantic of him. He's probably a member of the aristocracy. So here you can see that the mother is definitely sort of swaying more towards Sybil's view of seeing things as focusing on the romance of the situation, not the inherent danger of Sybil's position. Watch over Mother Sybil, he says. Watch over her. Sybil is always under my special care. Of course, if this gentleman is wealthy, there's no reason why she should not contract an alliance with him. I trust he's one of the aristocracy. He has all the appearance of it. So, again, we're judging by appearances. It might be a most brilliant marriage for Sybil. They would make a charming couple. His good looks are quite remarkable. Everybody notices them, right? So all we are judging him on is his beautiful good looks. Clearly, he's dressed as one of the aristocracy, so he must have money. Therefore, he's a good person. Bit of a leap, isn't it? Inexperienced though he was, this is now referring to James Vane, he still had a strong sense of danger of Sybil's position. This young dandy who was making love to her could mean her no good. Here, making love just means making overtures of love, not actual physical act. He was a gentleman, and he hated him for that, hated him through some curious race instinct for which he could not account, and for which that reason was all the more dominant with him. He was conscious also of the shallowness and vanity of his mother's nature, and saw that infinite peril for Sybil, saw infinite peril for Sybil and her happiness. Okay, so here we've got him as more realistic. He's got this sort of inherent loathing for Dorian and people of his class because of the situation he himself and his family is in, and he can see through the shallow vanity of his mother and his sister, who really just take Dorian at face value. So he and Sybil go for a walk outside, and he then he seems to not be able to speak much sense to his mother, and so he tries to warn Sybil. And he says, why have you not told me about him? He means you no good. Stop, Jim, she exclaims. So Jim is the shortening of James. You must not say anything against him. I love him. And again, James says, well, why? You don't even know his name. Who is he? I have a right to know. Oh, he's called Prince Charming. Don't you like the name? Oh, you silly boy, you should never forget it. If only you saw him, you would think him the most wonderful person. Someday you'll meet him when you come back from Australia. Okay, lovely foreshadowing there, lovely sense of irony. He never forgets Prince Charming, and he does one day meet him when he comes back from Australia. He says to Sybil he wants to enslave you. She says, I shudder at the thought of being free. I want you to be aware of him. To see him is to worship him. To know him is to trust him, says Sybil. And of course, we can see there how incredibly naive she's being, because she doesn't know him and she worships him because of his physical qualities. And she doesn't want to be free if being with Dorian means to be enslaved. You can't speak reason to somebody like this who's so completely and utterly in love, or thinks they're in love. So she's all of a sudden Sybil sees Prince Charming's carriage, and when you're rereading the book now for the second time, you see all the import of this moment. So he says, "Where is he? Let me see him. Point him out. I must see him," he explains. But then another carriage passes between them and Dorian, and she says, "He's gone. I wish you had seen him." I wish I had, as for sure there's a God in heaven, says James. If he ever does you any wrong, I shall kill him. And that is a sentence that resonates with us throughout the story. Sybil is very dismissive of her brother's concerns, and she says he's foolish. I wish you would fall in love. Love makes people good, and what you said was wicked. Okay, so she doesn't take her brother seriously at all, and she says that I don't want us to quarrel. I know you would never harm anyone I love. Not as long as you love him, I suppose, says James. And she says, I shall love him forever. And he too, forever too. Well, obviously not, because we know what happens. And he says he had better. So we've got this heavy sort of oath that James has now uttered, that if Dorian ever does any harm to Sybil, he will kill him. Sybil has no concerns because she knows that she and Dorian will love each other forever. There's nothing that can come between them. Their connection is so deep. It's based on things of, import and wisdom, not, haha. And the ending of this chapter, James is back in the little shabby apartment with his mother, and he wants to know what exactly happened with his father. And so she begrudgingly says, I knew he was not free. We loved each other very much. If he'd lived, he would have made provision for us. Don't speak against him. He was your father and a gentleman. Indeed, he was highly connected. And of course, there's now this horrible parallel between their father and Dorian Gray, a gentleman, somebody with a lot of money. James breaks an oath broke from his lips. I don't care for myself, he exclaimed, but don't let Sybil. Is he a gentleman, isn't it, who's in love with her, or says he is? Highly connected too, I suppose. So here he's bringing forth the irony for his mother and trying to say, yeah, well, do you not see that Sybil is in the same boat? Because the unspoken thing here is obviously when Sybil's mother says their father was not free, perhaps he was married and she had an affair with him, but realistically somebody of Dorian's class isn't free to marry who they want, and if they are, it comes with all sorts of ramifications, which means that the fairy tale life that they imagine is not usually one that comes to pass. For a moment, a hideous sense of humiliation came over the woman, and her head drooped. She wiped her eyes with shaking hands. Sybil has a mother, she murmured. I had none. And so it's sort of meant, I suppose, to make James feel guilty for doubting that Mrs. Vane doesn't have Sybil's best interests at heart. But as we know, even with the best intentions, she isn't able to save Sybil from her fate as a result of her interactions with Dorian. Okay, so don't bark. Sorry, I've got a growling dog sitting next to me. So we get some insight in this chapter into Sybil's living circumstances. We see that the fears that Lord Henry and then Basil later would express are true. She isn't really fit to marry Dorian. It would be very highly frowned upon from the people in his circles and his family, particularly. We get a little glimpse into how Sybil feels about him and how it's very much based on the same level of intimacy that Dorian has based his obsession. It's definitely superficial, based on looks. They don't know much about each other. In fact, Sybil doesn't even share his real name with her family. And of course, the most important part of this chapter, which then reverberates through the rest of the novel, is this promise that James has made to his sister that if Dorian harms her, it's a very sort of typical older brother thing to do anyway. But obviously, because of what happens to Sybil, it becomes more important and then echoes through the rest of the book and becomes an incredibly central plot point later on.